As you probably know by now, anniversaries are a recurring theme in terms of our T-Wrex documentaries. Such notable cases that we've made over the years include the 2005 Rock Island Line disaster, which of course we made a video of on their 20th anniversary. And similarly, there was the 30-year anniversary of Palo Verde, which occurred in 1995. Or if you really want to go to a more recent level, there of course was the 1996 Waiawega disaster. We had just made a video about that just as well. However, despite it only being a few days afterwards, we went ahead and buckled down because we have yet another disaster that is now turning 60 years old, as it occurred on this very day in March of 1966. But of course, we'll be focusing on the likes of the Great Northern Railway when two different trains, the Empire Builder and the Western Star, collided with each other, causing a bit of a ruckus up in the mountains. This is the story of the Buelow train disaster. A bit of history of the state of Montana is that it is considered to be the fourth largest U.S. state by area, having been founded on the grounds of a number of different cultural significances. First off, there were a large number of different native regions, various tribes that had once inhabited the state, conclusively making Montana one of the most significant in regards to native-related history. Also, with a total embodiment of 147,000 square miles by area from border to border, it's also considered to be full of land for any traveler hoping to get a break from the south or the east or west and head up to the north. There's also such unique things about Montana that are worth listing, such as bitterroot plants. These flowers in particular, with a unique mauve and purplish tone to it, are some of the most common that you can find in Montana, and that's why they are considerably named the state flower of Montana. There's even the likes of Yogo sapphires, alongside many other unique gemstones that embody Montana just as effectively. With various other things to mention, including certain cities such as Billings, Helena, Butte, and then of course, the likes of what we are about to talk about as well. Chester, of course, is seen as a smaller town as opposed to some of the larger ones in the state, but it is, of course, the exact significance of today's documentary. As for the railroad involved in Buelow, this, of course, was known as the Great Northern Railway, otherwise known as GN for short. This was a Class 1 railroad established in the 19th century by James J. Hill, an entrepreneur who held a lot of businesses in the Midwest, especially from Chicago and Milwaukee to the Twin Cities. He was able to co-found the railroad at some point when he began to realize that most of his Midwestern businesses weren't holding up all too well. He decided to create a railroad that would effectively allow for him to trade with Asia by way of connecting to the port of Seattle, Washington. And for the most part, it was a very, very difficult task. This, of course, was seen as Hill's folly. The entirety of what is known nowadays as the Empire Builder route was once operated by the Great Northern Railroad up until 1971, when Amtrak took over, and the Great Northern Railroad would in fact absorb into Burlington Northern in 1970. The date is March 7th, 1966. Two different Great Northern Railway trains, the Empire Builder coming from Chicago and making its way to Seattle and Portland, as well as the Western Star, which, similar to the Empire Builder, would carry passengers on the long journey heading eastbound as opposed to the Empire Builder heading westbound, but was also destined to have a lot more mail as opposed to the Empire Builder, which was meant to be a fast express train. There was a full crew aboard both trains as they made their way down the tracks and were eventually scheduled to meet up near Buelow siding. The crew for the Western Star, train number 27, was Bernard L. Runyon, aka Barney, the engineer, conductor Dick Parks, fireman Roger Hardy, and Bruce Primer, the brakeman. There was also a full crewman for the Empire Builder with Eric A. Walters, otherwise known as Sonny, along with Minor Stocking, the conductor, fireman Arnold Hale, and head brakeman Harry Maddock. There was also a rear brakeman known as Richard Guyman, or Dick. Engineer Runyon and Engineer Walters were once residents of Whitefish, Montana, a popular town in which that we'll discuss further details on later in the video. They were both well in their 60s and had plenty of experience on the railroad, mainly operating through the likes of Great Northern. But unfortunately, with the likes of most accidents, crewmen whom are well experienced, even these guys, were unfortunate enough to come together in a head-on collision that was just as rattling as it was catastrophic. In spite of certain snowstorms that were going on, with snow piling up to around 8 inches in select parts of Montana that both trains were traveling on, there was of course a timely, set timetable for both trains that the crewmen of both trains were attempting to follow as orderly and as efficiently as possible. The Harv dispatcher in Montana directed the Empire Builder to enter Buelow siding, 5 miles east of Chester, Montana, 47 miles west of Harv, Montana. Despite the Empire Builder slowing down to around 12 miles per hour by the time it was ready to enter the siding, the Western Star, unbeknownst to the crew of the Empire Builder and the Harv dispatcher, was speeding at around 79 miles per hour, heading eastbound directly into the path of the Empire Builder, as the Empire Builder itself hadn't yet entered the switch. This, unfortunately, would become a massive mistake for the crew of the Western Star. At 11:08 a.m., March 7, 1966, the trains collide with a combined speed of over 90 miles per hour. Both the Western Star engines and the engines of the Empire Builder were incredibly destroyed. Little to no parts survived intact, not even the frames. 2 deaths, 77 injuries were the full casualty count as put together by the Interstate Commerce Commission's full report on the accident. The report itself would be published later on in 1966, about 5 months later, with a small page count detailing mostly straight to the point details on what had happened, from the time that the trains impacted to the response at hand. The 2 engineers of both trains, Runyon and Walters, were the 2 deaths associated with the full report by the Interstate Commerce Commission. The response came around mostly with Reuben Halverson, Great Northern employee stationed in Chester. He had gotten a call on the radio talking about the train's collision. The crashed business car, possibly the president of Great Northern himself, John Budd, may have sent out the distress signal, especially allowing many people to realize about what was unfolding. But even after all that happened, with school buses taking away a lot of people to hospitals, and many other relatives coming from various counties, not just in Liberty County, but also surrounding counties, they also came around to help. But even after all that happened, the case was still clear. This was clearly an example of human intervention, possibly from one case The engineer of the Western Star may have missed signals, and it also could have been from the topographic region of Montana itself, mainly through hillsides and regions like the Golden Triangle, which especially contributed to the accident itself. Ultimately, with nearby sheriffs and investigators of various organizations, it became clear that the engineer of the Western Star had violated the red signal that should have told him to stop, and combined with the high speed and the Golden Triangle, this ultimately led up to this accident. While not much was known about the equipment itself, it's clear that according to some sources, some photos were taken, but they were extremely rare. They show one of the engines in particular of the Western Star, in fact, towed away for scrap. It looked to be reduced to around half its size because of the sheer force generated by the collision. A lot of changes would come to the railroads, including advancements in automatic train control and protection, reminding of the crews to look at their orders, and more importantly, to have better visual connection with the track itself. Also, various obstructive factors actually came around in the final report, generated by who knows exactly what was responsible for publishing the final report. Even the Interstate Commerce Commission didn't exactly have much to do with the publication of this exact report. Changes, however, did come around to the Great Northern Railroad, as well as various others that operated in this region. Consequently, as the years passed by, leading up to 1970, while Great Northern did get itself a newer livery with blue, white, and black, the merger would ultimately come around in 1970 when the likes of the Empire Builder and its own Great Northern combined with the Spokane, Portland, and Seattle, CB&Q, St. Louis, San Francisco, and a few other railroads all came to form Burlington Northern. While the Empire Builder would still have some ex-Great Northern equipment operate on it, the May 1971 formation of Amtrak ultimately allowed for the Empire Builder to be consolidated from the Great Northern's care and handling, and Amtrak from here on out would have full control and ownership of the line itself. And since then, it has been under great ownership from Amtrak. It is still regarded as one of the most popular overnight passenger services that even I myself, Jay Nowak, have actually been a part of. In fact, in 2021, I actually had moved out of state and moved all the way to Oregon as a means of using the Empire Builder, not only as a unique way to get to my final destination, but also to have a little extra time for some planning in mind. But that's another story. While the Great Buelow train collision of 1966 is somewhat forgotten by most people, and even more so when you realize that not very many people have heard about it, there, however, was another disaster that unfolded 55 years later. On September 25th, 2021, Amtrak train 727, the Empire Builder, was making its way westwards towards Washington, when unfortunately, it would derail not far from Joplin, Montana, some distance away from Chester and Buelow, but nonetheless, it would derail in an area that was mainly operated by the likes of the Burlington Northern and Santa Fe, which, once again, was former Great Northern territory. And because BNSF was part Great Northern and even sporting a similar livery inspired by Great Northern's paint scheme, investigators did determine that the tracks themselves were unfortunately damaged. So while it is grateful that this disaster was different than the 1966 derailment in 1966, this accident was quite similar, not just in casualty count, with 3 deaths and 49 injuries occurring. Damage to tracks was of course deemed as the most probable cause that led up to the derailment itself. Nowadays, it has been 60 years since the derailment occurred, and more so when the Great Northern collision itself had occurred just as well. But both of these accidents are great reminders that regardless of certain track conditions and problems with being in charge of signal location as well as identifying train orders. Various other problems can be noted by crew members or even by track foremen in any case. Either way you look at it though, we're all in charge of certain things. And more often than not, we're supposed to keep a good eye on the rails themselves. Because you just never know when an accident of the sorts is guaranteed to happen.